We are just about ready to get started. Okay. Well, welcome to our latest MAP talk. And the topic today is insights into Tucson's human service nonprofits. And our guest speaker today is Dr. Brian Mayer. I am George Hammond. I'm director of the Economic and Business Research Center here at the University of Arizona. Now, the way this is going to work is we're going to go for about a half an hour. I'm going to talk for a couple minutes here at the beginning, and then I'll pass the mic over to Brian. The MAP talks are being recorded, so we are being recorded as I speak. We will post the recording on the MAP dashboard website once we're all done. We are in conference mode at the moment, which means that everyone is muted except the presenter, so Brian and I. If you'd like to ask a question, we're going to reserve a little bit of time at the end for you to chime in and ask Brian a question. But you can email me anytime at ghammond@eller.arizona.edu, and I'll give you other contact emails as we go through our little introduction here. So one of the first things to keep in mind about the dashboard is it's the product of this innovative partnership between the Community Foundation for Southern Arizona, the PIMA Association of Governments, the Southern Arizona Leadership Council, and the University of Arizona. And we also want to be sure and thank our sustaining sponsors, Tucson Electric Power, the Thomas R. Brown Foundation, and the Freeport McMoran Foundation, as well as all of you out there who have supported the dashboard financially and in other ways. Really do appreciate it. And that support has really paid off. The dashboard has received state, local, and national recognition since its launch at the end of 2014. We were awarded the 2016 Award for Website Excellence from the Association for University of Business and Economic Research. We won the 2016 award-winning Data Viz Award from the Association for Public Data Users. We won the 2016 Common Ground Award from the Metropolitan PIMA Alliance, and we were one of 3 finalists for the Arizona Governor's Celebration of Innovation in Academia Award. So we're really proud of the website and what it's accomplished so far. We also want to make sure that you know that the dashboard is featured monthly in the Arizona Daily Star. It's on the front page of the Sunday business section once a month. In fact, that's coming up. It'll be featured again this Sunday. And the feature will highlight a fuel gauge and then give you a little bit of background on what the fuel gauge is telling us. So be sure and check that out in the Arizona Daily Star this Sunday. Now, the MAP dashboard is this constantly changing and evolving resource for the community to use to benchmark our progress and assess where we are. And the dashboard really makes a point of responding to community input. Now, in terms of our core indicators, about a year ago, we went out to the community and held community meetings to get feedback on the indicators that we had at the time and suggestions on new indicators that we might add. And we got 5 indicators that were suggested that we've elected to implement with the support of our advisory board. And 3 of those are already up and active on the dashboard. The first is the Housing Affordability Index. The second is physical well-being, and the third is creative occupations. We are working on behavioral health and road condition indicators as we speak, so look for those in the future. You also want to keep in mind that the dashboard also has a large number of what we call feature articles, and these are analyses and data sets that don't, for whatever reason, fit into the core data sets. Now, these feature articles come out about twice a month, and you can see we cover a wide variety of topics, and there are a lot of these that you can use to explore all the various issues that are of interest to you. And we also want to make sure that you engage with us. And one of the best ways to do that is to subscribe for updates to the MAP dashboard. So this is a newsletter. It comes out about once a month. We're not going to bury you in emails, we promise. But sign up for this newsletter, and you'll get an email about once a month that will highlight the latest changes and additions to the MAP dashboard. So that's a great way to keep in touch with us. You can also ask a researcher. So that's a little button there that'll lead you to a form to ask us a question. And we love to hear from you, and we'll help you understand better the data and analysis on the website. And once you do that, you will come into contact with our primary contact person on the dashboard, and that's Jennifer Pullen, our MAP dashboard coordinator, and she does an excellent job, and she'll get back in touch with you with an answer to any questions that you might have. So our topic for today is Tucson's nonprofits, and we have a guest speaker, Dr. Brian Mayer, Associate Professor at the University of Arizona. Dr. Mayer was the recipient of a MAP Dashboard White Paper grant to do this research. So we're really delighted to have him here this morning. So I'm going to make a quick transition to his presentation. And I will turn the mic over to Brian.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here, and I'm really excited to share the results of this Making Action Possible white paper. And so I want to say thank you to both George and Jennifer, as well as the MAP board for awarding this, as well as my collaborator on the project, Dave McBee, one of my amazing graduate students in the School of Sociology. So before we jump into our survey on nonprofits working in the human services sector in Tucson, let me just give you a little bit of background on poverty in Tucson. I'm sure many of you are already aware of some of these numbers, but I think this just sort of frames what we're trying to learn about the nonprofits nicely. So in 2016, the American Community Survey told us that about 25% of all individuals living in the city of Tucson live below the federal poverty threshold. That's about 19% for the Tucson metropolitan statistical area, or what pretty much amounts to Pima County. And even more disturbing than that 25% of all individuals is that a full third of all kids growing up in Tucson grow up in households earning below that federal poverty threshold as well. Based on data that I've been collecting through the Tucson Poverty Project, we estimate that about 85% of all low-income households below the poverty threshold are housing overburdened, or what HUD defines as spending more than 30% of their income on housing and utilities. That number goes down as income goes up, but the lows living in the most vulnerable conditions seem to be spending quite a bit of their income on housing here in Tucson. The Tucson Poverty Project also asks a lot about service utilization. So we ask about 300 households a year all sorts of questions about their well-being, how they're getting by. And one of the core sets of questions that we always ask is whether or not they're utilizing services, both from the state as well as from charitable or nonprofit service organizations. And we find a surprising number here at about 60% of those low-income households claim to have never received any form of assistance whatsoever. And that's been something of a puzzle for us, trying to figure out if there is so much need out there, particularly in housing, food insecurity, and other subjects. Why are such a large percentage of our sample not actually utilizing the services that are available to them? So in order to understand this, we've created this Tucson Poverty Project that originally started out as a subcommittee in Mayor Rothschild's Poverty Commission that operated from 2012 to 2014. There we were asked to collect data from low-income households to understand what was going on, particularly in Tucson, that might be different than other cities across the Southwest. We've been doing that since. We're in our 5th year of running the survey now, And we're trying to do this longitudinally, that means across time, following the same low-income households to figure out what the dynamics are in their day-to-day well-being. The Tucson Poverty Project is also currently coordinating an ongoing poverty commission outside the auspices of the mayor's office, focused on collective action and lobbying. And this work was actually supported by an earlier MAP white paper that you can find on the dashboard today called A Multi-City Comparison of Poverty Reduction Strategies, What Tucson Can Learn from Other Cities. Based on this ongoing work to understand what's going on at the community level, at the household level, really, in terms of what's going on in the low-income neighborhoods, we've also been challenged by a number of our community partners to understand the supply side of the equation. What's going on in the nonprofit community that might help us improve service delivery? Could we identify potential gaps and overlaps that could be addressed to better meet the needs of Tucson's low-income population? And so with the support of the Making Action Possible program, I'm now going to share some of those data with you. So what did we do? Well, first, we purchased a data set from GuideStar, which is itself a nonprofit that gathers IRS data as well as other data sets to compile a list of all 501c3 organizations registered in the country. We purchased the overall state list for Arizona. We then identified organizations with mailing addresses in the city of Tucson, which produced a sample of right around 3,000 organizations. We were then interested only in organizations that had an active financial set of incomes, and we identified this as a potential problem in piloting this data in 2016, where we discovered that of those 3,000 organizations listed in the city of Tucson, only about 1,500 reported an income of over $25,000 over the last 18 months. So we're focusing just on what we'll call those live organizations, and then we sorted them by their NTEE codes to programs related to the social services. And that produced a potential population of about 514 organizations. Another challenge we encountered when we piloted this in 2016 was that most of our requests for completed surveys went to inactive mailing addresses. And so in 2017, we invested a lot of time and energy in obtaining personal contacts using the telephone, using the internet to identify phone numbers that weren't provided by GuideStar, calling them and identifying the correct staff person with an active email address to take our online survey. We spent about 2 months doing this with a team of undergraduates and were able to identify 276 organizations out of that 514 that could be contacted over many attempts and actually would provide an active email address. Of those 276 organizations, 119 responded to our survey. That's a response rate of about 43% of those that we had personal contact with, and only 22% of the potentially eligible 514 organizations. It's important to note that most surveys today are accomplishing response rates of right around 10, good ones at 15%. So the fact that we were able to get 22%, I think, is quite promising and telling of the interest in helping us understand the nonprofit community. And when we look at it in terms of those with active telephone numbers or email addresses, 43% is actually amazing. So let's go into some of the key findings. So the first thing that we wanted to know is we wanted to know what were the types of services that this nonprofit community was currently provided. We gave them a list of possible topics that we then concentrated into these family groups. And what you can see here is that education is by and far the largest, the most frequently answered type of service provided. These categories are not mutually exclusive, and so a lot of organizations that would do things like provide family services or coordinate volunteer activities, which is a good chunk of that other category, also do things like education. But there are a fair number that just do standalone education programming. So 55 out of that 119, not mutually exclusive, telling us that they're doing something related to education. In terms of what they were currently doing, we were actually more interested in what they weren't doing, and I'm going to call this unmet needs. We asked two types of questions. The first was, what types of services are your current clientele asking of you that you do not directly provide yourself? A similar question was asked regarding outgoing referrals, that if a client asked you for a service, what are you making referrals out for? And the answers were sort of very much the same. So here I'm reporting on getting a request for that can't be directly met. If you look at the bottom here, 42 organizations responded housing, going on then goods and then other services, education being in the middle, and other ones that we would think would be more common, such as food related services or healthcare, only scoring an 11 and an 8 respectively. What we're taking away from this table is that housing is in high demand amongst the clientele of the nonprofits taking our survey. Given that housing was the number one answer in our 2017 data, we asked a series of follow-up questions regarding what were the circumstances reported to people asking for housing that could not currently be provided. And so here I've broken down that family of housing services into its four specific areas. And those are assistance paying rent, assistance finding affordable housing, assistance finding temporary emergency shelter, and help paying utilities. And so the organizations that responded that housing was in demand that could not be met were then given a series of questions to say, what are the circumstances that people are associating with these demands? And what we find here are the ones in red are actually the most interesting and the most frequently reported, and those are related largely to employment due to sudden job loss or due to chronic or ongoing unemployment, as well as eviction. And these, I think, actually correlate well with what we're learning in terms of low-income households in Tucson, is that they are very financially insecure or employment insecure, moving between jobs and then moving in between apartments or temporary or homes quite quickly. And so a lot of people in Tucson are experiencing these job loss, chronic unemployment, and need help with affordable housing. We then wanted to know, following up on that earlier finding that I presented, that about 60% or more of households reporting having never utilized services from the nonprofits, we asked those nonprofits then to reflect on why they felt people were unable to access their services. And by and far, the number one answer was related to transportation challenges. Some of these others that we might have thought have been important, such as stigma or fear of deportation, also related to literacy issues, were not that common at all. In fact, it was transportation, childcare, work, things related to time and being able to find and access these organizations are clearly the challenges that are most in the way. Related then to transportation being the most frequent type of barrier to accessing nonprofit services, we then asked in a similar way nonprofits to break down the circumstances related to people answering transportation. And what we see here is that it's public transportation. So the first two, no public transportation, unreliable public transportation. Similar ones, limited time, traveling with a child, no license, distance, no vehicle. All of these things seem to be the major barriers. But the number one type of barrier that seems to emerge is the insufficiency of the current public transportation system to get people to these nonprofit organizations. The last finding that I'll present, and I know I'm going through these quite quickly, so I encourage you to find the reports online so you can spend more time with the individual tables. We were also interested in the types of funding that were both currently being utilized by the nonprofits participating in our survey, as well as how those might be changing. Certainly, we know we exist in fairly uncertain and chaotic political times. And certainly that's very much reflected in the severe decline in both federal and state dollars. So the way this chart works is that bars that are blue are organizations reporting increases in those types of funding. So there we see individual donations, earnings, and in-kind contributions growing. At the same time, those in red are those that are declining. And there we can see a clear answer that federal and state dollars are significantly drying up. All right, so to summarize what's been a quick presentation, but I want to stay within this half an hour time so some of you have an opportunity to ask questions. The way we're looking at these data is that housing is by far the largest service that's currently in demand, but very few organizations are currently providing these. In fact, of that 119 organizations answering our survey, only 11 reported housing as their primary service. This seems to be most often triggered by a change in job status or chronic unemployment, as well as eviction. In terms of how the nonprofits think about their clientele and who's able to find them and who is not, that seems to be very much linked to challenges associated with the current public transportation system. And overall, federal and state sources of funding are significantly in decline, while individual giving is up. And so I think that's our last slide. And I'm going to have a little bit of help to open this up to questions. So please feel free to submit them.
Okay, you can invite them to just talk.
Okay, I think we have unmuted the audience. So if someone wants to answer a question, please go ahead and speak up.
Hi, my name is Colette. I'm also on the United Way board, so this is pretty fascinating because one thing I've always worried about is there's so many nonprofits out there that they're all competing for resources, but we're not really moving the needle on poverty. So what are some ways you suggest to present this information to the Tucson area nonprofits to say, how can we come together to actually work on what the needs are is what you found as far as housing?
I think that's a great question, Colette. This is something that a number of us are trying to do through this Poverty Commission, both in terms of sharing information as well as trying to coordinate service delivery. That was, in fact, the original intent of the Mayor's Poverty Commission was to identify priority areas as identified by the nonprofits in the city and the county that could have the greatest collective impact from. And you at the United Way are doing this with Cradle to Career. And so I think it's about identifying where the areas of need are. I might argue that housing needs some attention. And to be honest, I haven't seen the same type of collective impact organizing or discussion around housing the way there is workforce development, like you're leading, or education or other programs.
Yeah. One last question was just unemployment, and it sounds like it's insecure employment. What do you have any other detail on what's causing that or what that is?
No, we didn't ask that this year. So we piloted this survey in 2016, and housing came up in that data set and was amplified in the 2017 data set. And so we asked a series of questions specifically related to housing. Certainly, this is something we want to continue into the future, and we could introduce similar ones for topics like unemployment or food insecurity, so we can get that information as well. So the only thing I have in the current data set regarding unemployment is the frequency at which the participating organizations are identifying it. Other questions?
Good morning. This is Therese Peralta. I'm calling from United Way. I'm curious if you have any demographics with respect to the folks that you surveyed around family. Like, in other words, is it what age group? Because I'm primarily interested in older people. And at United Way, we also, in addition to Cradle to Career, we have initiatives that go from retirement to end of life. So I'd be interested to know if you were able to pull out any of that generational information.
Yes. So in the report, one of the tables that I did not present on today in the interest of time is we asked the nonprofits in the survey to identify the clientele or segments of their clientele that they thought sort of stood out. And so you can't see this, but I'm pulling that up. And it was actually very well clustered. No single group really stood out as being overserved or underserved. And so the number one, the most frequent demographic being served was women, followed by Latinos or Latinas. Families is right in the middle, 55 organizations out of that 119 identified families, and seniors was 40 out of 119. So a little less than half of the nonprofits reporting that they're focusing on those groups. And that's figure 3 in the paper, and I think we're going to get that up here right after the webinar. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. I was put myself back on mute there. Thanks.
You're welcome. So I think we have time for one or two more.
If no one else has questions, I have another quick question. What are some ways, it sounds like transportation to the nonprofits is a big issue. Freeport-McMoRan funded a project down in Green Valley for an app for that. So basically pulling in the information for the nonprofits to put it in a app format that people can access through their phone. Is there ways that we can share that knowledge to kind of help close that gap a little bit?
Yeah, no, I think things like that are great and impressive when they work. And one of the things that we're trying to accomplish with reports like this is creating knowledge so that the wheel does not need to be reinvented every time someone succeeds like that. So how can we help you get the word out about what's worked in Green Valley? Certainly, I would talk to Jennifer and George about whether or not that could be shared through the MAP dashboard, or if you can find my email attached to the report, send it to me and I'll get it to the Poverty Commission and we can get it out there.
Thanks.
You're welcome. And so with 1 minute left, it sounded like we were getting to the end of questions, but anyone else? Okay, so I want to say thank you, and George is going to give us a final farewell.
Well, thanks, Brian. That was fantastic. We really appreciate you coming by, and we appreciate the work that you've done on the white paper grant. It's a great paper. We really like it. We really think it'll have an impact on the community. So we will have the white paper posted on the MAP dashboard website as soon as possible. And we will be back in April with the next MAP Talk webinar. So thank you, everyone, for attending. Thank you to Brian for presenting. Everybody, we wish you a good day. Thanks very much.